Mount Index.
Fran and I attended the RCSD meeting last night on behalf of Kern County Historical Society. And we have asked them to consider renting, for a very small fee, the old building on Diamond Street that was at one time the library. Now, there's all kinds of issues, I understand, with the building. We were not able to get in and see it. We're working on getting that. I just want you to know it may not fly, they may not approve it, but we have asked because we would like to have a place to have a museum where we can show some of the materials that we have. When Glenn and Doreen closed up and moved into Lancaster, they gave away a lot of their memorabilia, but we still have some. And it's in my barn. And being in my barn, locked up, does not let people see it. And that's the whole purpose. People are supposed to be able to have access to some of this information. So we really would like a place so that we could have open a little bit so that people have access. So that's what we're working on. I just wanted to tell you about that quickly. Also, two other things. This book has just come out. It was written by two gentlemen. One of them is related to family of Doreen Settle. It's about, of course, John Searles and Searles Dry Lake. It's a fascinating book. I'm about a third of the way through it. I think we might try to get a few. They're a little pricey, but I thought we might try to buy a few and carry them. They were kind enough to mention that some of us had met with them and helped them. Particularly, we connected them with Clifford Burton, and they actually went down and talked to Clifford. So that this is an interesting book. I wanted to mention that. Also, Reuben brought this picture that someone had given to him. Help me out with
It
this.
was back in 1986 or 87, one of my prior customers. And they asked me if I live here in Rosamond, and I said, yes, and she brought me this beautiful picture of Tropico Mine.
That she had painted.
She had painted.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So that's, we need to be able to collect and display this kind of stuff. This is why we're looking for something. Okay. I think those are my only announcements until we talk about the program today and the nominating committee. So, Siobhan, you're on.
There's nothing like a rainy morning to kind of let the devil get a hold of you. And sometimes that happens to me. And so when it does, I call Ann Yost.
And you're really
Ghostbusters.
And, one of the nice things about being in a small community is you kind of know what people's talents are. And so, if you want something organized and organized well, you're going to call Gretchen. And if you want somebody to con you out of every nickel you have, you're going to call Fran. And so everybody has a talent, and you kind of learn about these talents. And Anne has a gift of putting things to music. And you can just kind of, it's like poking a bear. You just kind of give her a little stab, and she just gets wound up. And
Just to shut you up.
and there's probably a lot of truth in that. And I happen to have been there the day they were taking down the Bob Keith Ford sign. And I just thought I was going to just sit on the corner and die. My heart was so broken. And as I'm standing there, I look over and it's Char Taylor's husband, Tom, taking down the sign.
I heard about it.
And I immediately felt like, that this will go to a home that is loved.
Sure.
And so I am standing on the corner in Rosamond, California. And Anne, who has such a gift, is going to come up here and she's going to lead us in this rousing rendition.
See what you get?
And
Yes, yes.
yes, I did. And so you have the words, Anne has the tune, and I am truly capable of shutting up. So, Miss Yost.
Yes, dear. Okay, so this song is by the Eagles, and I'm sure most of you know how it goes. So we just changed it up a little bit because there were some things that Siobhan specifically asked it to have. I am not a singer by any stretch of the imagination, but all right.
Okay, so
Sing
we're doing it
along.
all together?
Loud.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Ready? Yeah.
You'll recognize it.
Whoops, maybe go. You're in.
Okay, acapella, I'm not good at all. So it goes, well, I'm sitting on a corner in Rosamond, California, such a fine sight to see. Well, it's stretching Lord in a brand new Ford, pulling out a bobby. Come on, baby, don't say your name. I know your sweet car was sold by the So now let's listen in, 'cause Glenn's gonna take us back again. Tropico, we're coming in, take it easy.
And I've got to tell you that Ian did that, sick, dead, and dying, driving in from Tropico, and I will get you a good word. So, thank you, Ian. Such a part of Rosamond history, and Gretchen for buying his last.
The last part.
Really?
It's close. Okay. So what did they have? All right, Ruben would like to say something.
As I stand here, I see so many familiar faces. Many of you are my clients that have bought and supported Keith & Sons Ford for so many years. Keith & Sons has been in business since 1960. 2019, it has come to an end. And, the owners wanted to retire. And so all I can say is it's been a blessing to work there for 44 years.
Whoa.
Now that I'm 50, I realize I've worked most of my life there. So I thank you all for, supporting us. I have moved now. I went and applied for a job and they hired immediately over at H.W. Hunter, ran up the West. So I'm going to become a Dodge person. So anyway, thank you for your support.
Okay. Thank you, Ruben. One of the things that we need to do today is we need to have the nominating committee report on the people that they have come up with, because it's time to be thinking about new officers and board members. We will revisit this again next meeting and then elect officers and board members in April. So my nominating committee, who wants to be spokesman? It's Terry, Joe, and Dolores. All right, Joe, you're on.
So we contacted those who are currently serving to see if they wanted to continue to serve in the same capacity, and which included Gretchen as the treasurer, and.
No,
No, you're the president.
Gretchen.
I mean, as the president.
We're still talking.
She's the one with the windows inside. And then Dolores as the vice president. And I've been serving as treasurer. And Janet as secretary. And then we had some members at large, which are Dina DiCaprio and, well, Rick, I don't know how to say his last name. Rick,
He resigned and
Terry Landseidel
was his replacement.
replaced him. Terry's here, is kind of new, so, yeah, there's Terry for those of you.
Siobhan
And
is
Siobhan.
the director too.
Okay.
Don't forget Siobhan.
So of those, Dina DiCaprio wanted to get off and not do that, and I wanted to also get off as treasurer, so we had those two positions open. We contacted two people about being treasurer, and they both said no. So as of right now, we have no treasurer nomination. So think about that and, talk to us if you possibly have some suggestions or you yourself feel very capable of doing that.
Please.
So they let me do it, so it must be pretty easy. And then for Dina DiCaprio's spot, we spoke to Joe Polly, who's sitting right back here. And she was a member at large, and he has agreed to take her position in that capacity. So that's our report for now. We'll have to revisit the treasurer thing and figure out what we're going to do.
We do need a treasurer.
And the election's April 15th.
And the election again is April, and there'll be nominations taken from the floor at the next meeting for our so. Okay, that's all that I had. Janet, do you want to talk about this, Siobhan? You haven't seen the DVD, but Janet has watched it. Do you want to go ahead and talk about it a little?
All right,
It's
just
been a while since I've seen it.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I think that's
Just real quick, it's a video of Glenn Settle out at the Gold Camp. And of course, he's no longer with us, so it's really neat to have this video. And when you watch it a couple of times, you start getting more and more details. He tells so much. He's not real active. He sits in his chair, like I would probably be doing right now, when he's talking for much of the time. But it's real interesting. At the end, I'm going to ask some questions, and whoever gets their hand up first, you can't blurt the answer out. But if you get your hand up first and have the right answer, you get a little tiny chocolate, foil wrapped chocolate or whatever. So pay attention, try and pick out the details. Remember, I was a school teacher, so I don't know if that's good or bad. Let's go.
okay for the lighting. Do we need to get it done? Everybody's okay?
Set. Well, what we're, Jeff Dyke and I are doing a little history on these old buildings here in Gold Camp. The date's Friday, August the 9th, 2001. And we're going to tell you a little bit about what each one of these old buildings, where they came from and when they were moved here. This old Pondale Railroad section house, of course, is important to me because I was born here in 1911. My father went to work for the railroad, Southern Pacific Railroad in Santa Paula shortly after he was married to my mother, Marion Allen, in Santa Paula in 1900. They were married. And he worked around for the Southern Pacific around Santa Paula and Fillmore and Piru. We lived in Piru a while. Then we moved to Pondale here in about 1909. We moved into this old building. As far as I know the history on it, when the railroad came through in 1876, at first the railroad workers that were working on the track, as section people, lived in boxcars which were on rails on the train. But about 1880 they decided they should have more permanent quarters. And they built this old building and some buildings next to it for the Mexican laborers to live in. And my dad had been worked up with a track worker around the Piru Santa Paula area. Now he was a section foreman. In case of section foreman, you're wondering what they did. They were the ones to keep sure that the tracks and the ties and everything were in good shape for the many passenger trains they had then and the freights so they wouldn't derail. So they had an important job making sure that the rails and everything were in good shape. So my dad every day would have to go out, when I stopped thinking, he worked for Southern Pacific Railroad about 40 years. He'd have to go out on that old hot rails every day with his Mexican gang and make sure that the rails were all in good shape. So we moved here in about 1909 to Pondale. And I think about that time, Pondale probably had about 350 people. And almost all the employment then was by the Southern Pacific Railroad. The main reason it was an important stop was they had many of the engines and their engineers and the helpers, as we call them, which would help the freight trains up over the hill to Vincent. Then they had a Y there at Vincent where they could turn around and come back to Pondale. So this old building is where I came in. When we moved there was my mother and father and 5 settled children in the picture so far. And I was the 6th child born in 1911, September 28th. So they did have a doctor in Pondale at that time, so I do have a doctor's name on my birth certificate. It was in Lancaster, like where my good friend Glenn Rouse and a lot of them were born. They were born in this world by Mom Everett, who was a house mother that put many of them into the world. But they must have had a doctor in Pondale, because I noticed on my birth certificate it was signed by a doctor. So when I was born there in 1911, we lived there until about 1919 or 20, when some of the kids started getting to be of high school age, and Antelope Valley High School at that time was the only high school between San Fernando and Bakersfield. So any kid that wanted to go to high school had to go to the Antelope Valley High School in Lancaster. So that was the reason we moved to Lancaster, so the kids could be closer to the high school. And in fact, 7 of the settled children graduated from Antelope Valley High School from the period of starting in about 23 up until, well, the last one was after World War II. Jack, my youngest brother, graduated, I think, 1945. Well, some of the things I remember about this old building, in about 1918 or 1919, the first airplanes were landing in Pondale, and the old Pondale baseball field was about 2 blocks in front of our house. And the airplanes, the old Jenny airplanes, the biplanes were to land on that field there, and it was a big excitement for the city of Pondale, because everybody in the whole surrounding area had to see these newfangled flying machines. And so as far as I know, they were the first ones to land in that area anyway. So the main reason they were landing there, they were flying from Bakersfield to Los Angeles, and they had to refuel. So sure enough, they came in that day, and there was big excitement. Everybody dashing over to the baseball field to see those new things exciting day. But that same day, just before these airplanes had landed, the Mexican quarters next to us had burned down a few weeks before, and they were rebuilding it. Fortunately, it didn't destroy this house. And as far as I know, this house was built in about 1880, what I could find out in the railroad. And actually, as you can see, it's not too bad a shape. And the main reason for that is that the railroad had a crew that came in every year and worked on it and kept it up. But getting back to that day of the airplane landing, my brother and I were having a race over on the form of the new buildings, and I fell and cut my eye on one of the 4x4s, and they had to call a doctor, and they had me strapped down there cutting up my eye when those airplanes landed. The doctor said I had to finish the job in a hurry, so I still have a scar over my right eye there. I think he showed me up in a hurry to get rid of me. But anyway, it seemed to work out all right. And another thing was exciting about, that's probably one reason I became so interested in sports. The Pondale baseball field was right out in front of us, and I was the bat boy for the Pondale baseball team. And I got to go to, where they played all over the desert, like at Randsburg and Mojave and Tehachapi. And I remember one thing was quite a thrill for me when we would go to Tehachapi. We would stop at Mojave at the Harvey House. The Harvey House is where they would take the bastards off the train and feed them because they didn't have diners on the train. And the Harvey House in Mojave at that time was a 2-story building, and the helpers and the workers stayed upstairs, and the restaurant and the station agent and everything was downstairs. So it was quite a thrill of a young little old boy from Fondale eating at Harvey House, because they had fancy table settings. They had linen napkins and silverware and all things like that. So I remember it was quite a thrill to eat in the Harvey House. So my job with the Fondale baseball team, they actually only had about 3 baseballs. So when there's a foul ball, sometimes all 3 of them would be out in the brush there, and we kind of had to stop the game until we found the ball so they could continue. So actually, as soon as the foul ball was hit, I was supposed to take off and find it and try to retrieve it and bring it back. So, of course, they thought I always thought that was an important job, but I guess it was to get the game going. Well, Chad and I are continuing our tour of Gold Camp with the old buildings that are still left here as of this month, which is November 19th or 2001. And the next 3 buildings are kind of interesting old buildings, and they have a lot of history. This building that I'm sitting on the porch of here was the superintendent's house of the Mud Mining Company. And the Mud Mining Company was located on the north side of Soledad Mountain. And I think they were in operation from around the 1880s, some until the 1900 period. And I wrote to the mud people and tried to get more information, but they didn't have much on this part of their operation. They're the ones that started the cactus mining operation over in the Middle Buttes, and they became well known when they found that big copper deposit in the Isle of Cyprus. So anyway, these next 3 old buildings were part of their operation. And this one here, the superintendent's house, you'll notice was the living quarters, I guess, for the superintendent. In those days, they didn't have air conditioners or coolers, so they had porches that usually ran clear around the building. So as the sun moved different times of the day, they could move around and still be in the shade. Now, this old building itself has been, many of you have seen this, because I bet it's been in at least 25 commercials or movie television shows. And the one I remember, this was supposed to be an Outback building in Australia, and MasterCard made a commercial here. And while they were filming here, they had sheep running all around out in there, and have a good picture of it when they had it all picked up for location. But one interesting thing had happened while they were filming here, they brought in, for this commercial, they didn't use them here, but they needed 2 kangaroos. So they had them in a truck while they were filming here. But they went over on the west side of the valley here and turned them loose. And one of them got away, and it took them a whole day to catch that kangaroo. You can imagine some desert brother driving down the road and seeing that big kangaroo come up along and say, man, those Antelope Valley jackrabbits are bigger than ever. But anyway, this old building, many of you have seen it in the MasterCard commercial for the Outback of Australia, and I think Rockwell, IBM, and some of the things I could think that were filmed there in different commercials. And they liked the inside of it. Eventually, Jed and I'll go inside. And actually, it had a fancy trim. You can see around, I think, as usual, the vandals are very rough on these old buildings. In fact, I see they kicked all the doors in on this one. So shed, and I'll go inside and see what it looks like now.
I forgot to
We
mention, you
had
don't
the
get to
goat camp.
see
We had this
inside,
fixed
they don't
up
go in.
Like one of the mine, like it would be the mine superintendent's house. We had some real old furniture, and some of it came from San Francisco, and the man that owned the furniture, the story was that he was hung by the vigilantes up there, so he must not have been a very good man. Well, Chad and I are continuing our tour of the old historic building in Gold Camp. The one in front of us here right now played an important part in the history of Antelope Valley. First, going back to, again, the 1885 to 1900 period, it was a boarding house for the mud mining camp, which was on Soledad Mountain. And the miners would come here and have their meals. And we moved this in the back, there was an old brick oven. And of course, Louis Arabica, who was a house mover in Rosamond, moved these old buildings for us. And we put these big old long steel and hoisted up on the steel. That big old heavy oven just went right through. And it's still probably up there on Solid Mountain. So we weren't able to move that. But one thing was kind of interesting, I'll show you here. I don't know if Jed sees this or not, but in the back there, there's the one part of the building a little higher than the other. And when he's coming down Soledad Mountain, of course, there's no good roads. And as he hit a couple of rocks, it started splitting apart there. And we weren't sure if the steel even bent. It's quite a heavy building, as you see. And we weren't sure if we're going to get this old building down there or not. But we finally did. And we knew as soon as we got a building big enough, it'd be nice to have started a historical society here in Antelope Valley. So in about 1959, 58, when we opened up for tours, we moved this building in shortly after that. And we fixed it up. And originally, the seats in here came from the old Officers Club at Muroc. They're all gone now. The seats we use in there now originally were used by Judy Garland's dad at the Lancaster Theater in Lancaster. And when they remodeled that, refurbished it, he gave them to Paul Hubbard, and Paul Hubbard moved them in the old theater at Randsburg. So that's where we got the old seats are in there now. And they were the loge seats. They were the better ones. Yeah, and I'll go in there later and show some of them to you.
They don't.
But anyway, this old building, one story they tell about it, when it was up on Soledad Mountain, you can see the porch is a little high off the ground, and there was a little girl sitting there with her legs dangling down, and she was bitten by a rattlesnake and it killed her. So this old building has a little sad and then some interesting information on it because it was the boarding house for the mud mining camp, and eventually it became part of the Karma Mining Company. And we obtained it from Bert Wegman and the Wegman family. So when we moved it in there, then we fixed it all up, and we had a couple of old murals on there from the Hollywood racetrack, which were Western scenes, and had the inside fixed, the big old pot-belly stove to eat it. And we got an old bar from an old hotel in Tehachapi, which we had across the back. And the Historical Society served many good refreshments across that bar. Not liquid, but solids. But anyway, we'd have our big Christmas party here and get that old pot-belly stove going. And it seemed like sometime most of the meetings we averaged about when we first started. So we always had a good attendance. But on a cold night, we had a hard time getting away from the old pot-belly stove. So this old building was all fixed up until 1960 or 1980 when we closed down. Then the Historical Society. Another thing was that the meetings, the older people, if nature called, had to just go outside and use one of the tall brushes here. When they moved to the community building in Rosamond, of course, they had the inside plumbing. Things were picking up, and heating was much better. All they had to do was turn on the switch and air conditioning when it got hot. But here, when it got hot, you just open up the doors and windows, and in the winter, when we just kept adding extra coal. Another little interesting story, we had a big coal bin here. We used to keep the coal in. And we used to get a lot of youth groups when we had the tours Los Angeles area. So when they came up here, they'd pick up every little rock and come running with it to me. They thought every rock up here in the hill probably was full of gold, but I was at the disappointment to tell them there wasn't much gold in the rock they found. But they'd eventually find that coal bin. They'd come running up with a piece of coal. What's this? What's this? We say, well, we burned that in the stove to keep for heat. Oh, you can't burn that. That's a rock. They'd never seen a piece of coal, the kids in the city. And one little kid said, why don't you just push the switch? That was the easiest way. But anyway, we had a lot of interesting events while we had the stores open. We had youth groups from all over and senior citizen group and every other group. But as I said before, it never was a profit-making deal because already night turned around and put everything in to keep these old buildings up, and it was quite a project. But getting back to this building then, so in 1959, we got the building moved in, got it furnished with chairs and seats and the old pot-belly stove, and we had, in May was the first meeting of the Kern County Historical Society, which was held here. And there's quite a story on the Historical Society and their 40-year history in one of their publications called Gold Fever, telling about the various meetings. And we had some very notable speakers come here. Chuck Yeager was one of our speakers one time, and Joe Walker and Coach Wood. We had a lot of big speakers from all over the state. So this building had a lot of interesting tales. And we had many of the old timers tell their story of their experience here in Antelope Valley in the early days. And we had, Doreen and I had a tape recorder, and we taped them, and we gave most of those tapes to Norma Kerber at the museum. So she has a lot of the voices like Bertie Weber and Ernery Kidd and the Rivers and a lot of the Joe Walker and Chuck Yeager and a lot of the old timers. One thing when we had the Go Camp, we were fortunate being close to originally Muroc Air Base, later became Edwards Air Base when Glenn Edwards was killed in the Northrop bomber flying wing, and they changed it to Edwards Air Base. And we would get many of the X-15 flyers and the notables from Edwards come over here as our guests to take a tour. So that was thrilling. We had lots of the famous people from Edwards and Armstrong and Aldrin was down the moon and different ones, and all the famous X-15 flyers like Joe Walker and Chuck Yeager and Neil Armstrong and many others. And of course they used this for many TV movies. I remember one shot, a television show they shot here, the FBI show, Efren Zimbalist Jr. and John McIntyre, who had made a show called Wagon Train, a series. He lived in this old house over here, and they used a lot of the old buildings there. And as I said, they've been used in many TV shows. But this here was the birthplace of the Historical Society, and they met here for 20 years. And now they meet, let's see, we celebrated our 40th anniversary in 1999. So they're getting up, working up toward the 50th year. They still meet in the community building in Rosamond. So the one thing that's kind of interesting, Doreen always figured, well, we started here, Doreen and I started so we would get one of the old timers to be the president. And that didn't work out. They pulled a fast one on me. They said, well, you're going to be the president. So I was the charter president for the first 3 years. And along the years, Doreen had 2 terms as president of the Historical Society. And this old building, when they had the World Championship Chili Cook-Off, was where they used this for their headquarters, where they signed people up and everything. And about a week ahead of time, there'd be truckload after truckload of supplies coming in there, and they'd had that old building full of supplies for the chili cook-off. So almost all the famous VIPs that came to the chili cook-off at one time were in this old miners' hall. So anyway, I had some interesting stories to tell. You think anything I left out? Yeah? So anyway, then we'll move over to one more old building south of that, the blacksmith shop. Dykes and I are filming these old buildings in Gold Camp. We started last week and we did about 4, and today we're going to finish the remaining 4 or 5 that are here. This old building that I'm sitting in here, kind of a reddish color, is part of the old Ritter Ranch, which is kind of interesting. There's been a lot of publicity lately about big development on the old Ritter Ranch out toward Leona Valley. Well, this old building, according to Frida Ritter, who married Bud Redmond, she's the one that gave me most of the background on this building. Frida told me that this building was probably built in about 1880s or late 80s or early 90s, and the Ritter family used it for a little bit of everything. You know, they had a big vineyard and had a winery and had wheat and had cattle over there in the Leona Valley area. So this building was used a lot for storage, and Frida told me at the time there's nothing in it on Sunday, they even had church services in here at times. Now, when we moved it up here from Leona Valley to the Gold Camp, Louis Zaravica, who moved all these buildings for us, was a house mover in Rosamond. But this one was quite easy to move. But as you can tell, the weather's really hard on it because the roof's getting kind of bad. But what we used here in Gold Camp was for our store. People would drive up in the parking lot, then they would come through here and get their tickets for their mine tours. And while we're waiting for the mine tours, they'd go around and look over all the things that are in these old buildings. So we had a lot of old store fixtures in this old building. And then when we moved in the Kent and Duntley building, which we're going to do next, we moved the store from this one to the Kent and Duntley building. So then we just fixed this up like it would be an old store in the old days. We had lots of mining relics in there, and kerosene lanterns and all kinds of old equipment in there. So this, again, if this old building could talk, it could tell us a lot of tales. So this was part of the old Ritter Ranch in Leona Valley. Any questions yet? We moved it probably about 1960. Most of these buildings were moved in there in the 60s. So we're going to move down to the Kent and Duntley building next. This next building that Jed and I are filming here has a lot of history, because it was, we call it the Stuckey Kitten Duntley building, because they were the 3 families that lived in there. And it was Rosamond's first hotel, post office, and store. Because when you get up into it, it's all partitioned off for different portions. So you had 3 rooms on the west side for the hotel rooms, and then the post office was in one room and the store was in another. And a man by the name of Stuckey built this in the 1880s. He's a retired sheriff, and he moved out here. It was about 2 blocks south of where Rosamond Boulevard is on Sierra Highway. And so Ella Kitten, who came out here for her health, was Stuckey's niece. So they lived in a while. Then Ella's brother, George Kitten, was one of the early cattlemen here. Remember when I had the store in Rosamond in the mid-30s, Ella would come up and buy her groceries, and she'd tell me a little bit about this old building. And one sad thing about it is if we would shoot it from the front, it looks pretty bad, because we have had to put the front on 3 or 4 different kinds, but it seems like Mother Nature won't cooperate, and every time we get one of those strong western winds, off goes the front. So right now it's off, but the inside of this building's real interesting. A lot of the front part of it is all built with square nails. So Ella Kitten was telling me about a lot of even maybe in the early days of Rosamond, they even had a few meetings in this old building. And when we moved it out here, we moved this probably in the middle 1860s. We found a lot of the old post office records. And some of the things that was interesting was that a lot of the mail that came into Rosamond was shipped from the town of Tropico. And in case you don't know, Tropico used to be near Glendale. There was a larger town in Glendale, and when you left Los Angeles, if you look at the old early road maps, you see Tropico. And the men that eventually came up here, worked the mine, or bought it from Ezra Hamilton, they named the mine Tropico at their little town down there. So this old building that's behind us here, like all these old buildings, if it tell us, it can tell you a lot of tall tales. Going back to that last building where Chad and I just shot, these old buildings have been used in a lot of television series, but one thing I remember about this one, the old Ritter building, they were shooting an FBI show here. It was a series with Efren Zimbalist Jr. And John McIntyre, who had a series of his own for a long time called Wagon Train, was in this FBI series. In fact, he was a villain, which seemed unusual because he's such an easy, nice-going guy. But this was John McIntyre's home in the FBI show. And one thing was interesting, his son was also in this series they shot here. And John, every time he was more interested, he never took any time off because anytime his son came before the camera, he had to be out there to see how his son was doing. But again, these old buildings all around us here, if they could just talk to us, they could tell a lot of interesting stories. Is my mic on?
Yeah.
I want to tell you a little bit more about this building. This building, Jed and I just filmed the old Stucky Kent Dudley building. One little story I forgot to tell you. Raleigh Dudley, when he sold his Oak Creek Ranch up there back of Willow Springs in the mountains over near closer to Tehachapi, he was the last one to live in this building. And when he died, it was abandoned then. But the one thing we all remembered about it, it was a pretty old building, really pretty dilapidated. It never was a real classy building, but when Raleigh moved into it, he built a nice new big metal garage for his Cadillac alongside of it with an electric door and everything. And everyone in Rosamond used to laugh. They didn't think that garage and this old building were compatible. Anyway, Raleigh liked it, so he was the last one to live in that old building. And his family gave it to us, and Louis Zaravica moved it out here. Now tell me when you're ready for this one. This old building that we're in front of, well, we're at, I don't know, you'd say we're the front of it or side of it or somewhere. It was in Lancaster on about a block north of what is now Lancaster Boulevard in about Date Street. And Raleigh Dudley told me that they were going to tear it down. He said we should have this because it's one of Lancaster's old residential buildings. Probably built in the late 80s or 90s, Raleigh thought. And he said there's a family named Basler, B-A-Z-L-E-R, that lived in it, so they always call it the Basler building. But when I was growing up in Lancaster, Bob Cameron, who owned the Ledger Gazette, was living in it. When the Raleigh told us they were going to tear it down, we got a hold of the Bob Cameron family. They were living up in Northern California. They said, yeah, we could have it. So again, Louis Zaravica moved this up here. And we fixed it up as a living, like a residential house. We had a lot of old furniture and things in it. One thing I remember that Barbara Rouse, who's a good friend of mine, got one of the old beds out of it in there and fixed it up when we closed down, and I think still using it. We had a lot of interesting old furniture in it. But the one thing that's interesting about this old building, Jed, later on we'll have to have you go in there, the building contractor really like this old building, because when you go in the partitions, you'll notice there's no 2x4s. It's a very unusual construction. That was one thing that they were always interested in. And when we had this old building for the museum, we had a lot of the front part glassed in with old window frames and whatnot and shelves. And we had our bottle collection in there, so the sun rays would hit the bottles and turn them purple. As you probably know, up until 1914, about the time World War I broke out, they used manganese in the glass materials, and the sun rays would turn them purple. But during World War I, there was a shortage of manganese, so they quit using that material in the glass. And so that's the way you could date a lot of the old bottles, because before about 1914, the sun rays would turn them purple, and after that they wouldn't turn because they had different material in them. But we had a large bottle collection all across the front. That's the reason all those old glass windows are in there. But again, this old building was, according to Raleigh, was one of Lancaster's early residential buildings. But anyway, getting back to this old building here, the old Munn's house, as we call it, it's one of the most interesting buildings we have here in Gold Camp, because it was the Kern County Historical Society from about 1960 to 1980 for 20 years. But first I'll give you a little background on this building. Eli Munns and his brother John and his sister Ingeborg all lived in it, and they were all here when we had the dedication for the Historical Society Museum. In fact, I think Jed and I have a tape of that event, and they all told a lot of history about it. And they said originally this building was built near where Plant 42 is now. It was on a ranch out there. And Eli Munns moved it. He took it down board by board, marked each board, moved it to Leona Valley, and raised a large family in it. And then after his family was raised, they decided to do away with it. So we moved it up here again. Louis Zervika moved it for us probably in the 1960s. But one thing is interesting, they would tell me about it. This corner right up behind here, one time was used as a post office for that area. And when you go inside a little later on, and then it has an upper story. And you go up that stairs, and you wonder how anyone lived upstairs, because you can't even stand up there. But Eli Munns raised a large family in this building anyway, and they had a lot of good stories. The Historical Society, when they had the museum here, all the members and different ones gathered things be displayed. We had a lot of glass showcases and had it kind of screened off so we could use things on the wall. And the Old Timers Association of Antelope Valley, which meets the second Sunday of every October, had a real large collection of old photos, which they loaned us to display here. And then every year they'd have on display at the Old Timers thing. Well, when we closed down, Frank Lane picked them up for the Old Timers Association, and now we don't see him there at the Old Timers anymore, but I understand Frank Lane gave them to the West Side Historical Society, and Milt Stark does bring a few of them to the Old Timer thing each year. But they have the Old Timers photo collection, which we used to display in here. We had fixed up one room, a living room. Kitchen still had the old wooden cooking stove in it. It had a lot of the old original furniture in it. One thing that's interesting about this building, it's been changed a little bit. You'll notice the ramp going down over there. Like I said before, they used to have these old buildings and filming TV series here. And there was a TV series called Doc Elliott. James Franciscus was a country doctor in Colorado, and they shot a show here. And then this film, they shot here. One of the miners was living in here. And they had a big cave in at the mine, so the cameras were all set up here showing the people rocking on the porch, and they heard the sirens going off the mine. They got all excited and started running up the vine, and in that certain show they shot here, Merle Haggard, the country western singer, was in it, and he was supposed to have lost a leg, and they had to amputate. Franciscus, Dr. Elliott, had to amputate his leg up there in the mine. So I remember that series. Also, Doreen, my wife, was in that one. She was one of the miners' wives. But this building has a lot of history because it's been moved from Flat 42 to Leona Valley, and then by Louis Dervick and to here. So anyway, one of these days, as they start some of these old buildings at the new fairground, they're talking about moving this one and the old section house, the one I was born in, and the superintendent's house, and maybe the Basel house, to make quite a little group of old buildings for the new fairground. We'll hopefully do it. There's a couple little things here that not directly associated with this building, but this old Studebaker, Jed will probably take a few pictures of it later on, wagon was used when they were building aqueduct. And well, it wasn't the wheel to drive it off, but Munz gave that to me. And you notice on the side, you can see the name Studebaker. Another old item over here is the Noel almond sheller, which the Godey family gave to us. And you can see it, the big old piece of equipment. Chad will probably get a few pictures of it later. But it looks like a lot of machinery yet to shell almonds. Anything you think of, Jed?
I would tell you that Jed Dyke was a historical society member who was responsible for keeping this. I mean, it was his idea, I think, to videotape Glenn, and thank heavens he did. Because what incredible stories. He talked about the Mud Mining Company, and that's the Mud family. There's a Harvey Mudd College down in the Los Angeles area. That's the Mudd family, and they mined on Soledad, also Middle Buttes, which is up off Bacchus Road. And he talked about the Historical Society's anniversary. This is the 60th year of the Kern County Historical Society. In May, we're having a large celebration, and Fran, can tell us a little bit about it if you want to. Fran, where are you? You want to talk a little bit about the 60th?
So right now we're doing what we call building history. We're taking old photos and comparing them what they look like today. In fact, Ruben was one of the first ones we gave it to. We had some pictures from the 1950s and 60s. But we put that in there and then took a shot of what it looks like today. And it's interesting because then he went out of business and so. But anyway, so these pictures are going up around town. If you go look at K.S. Market, you'll see that it was once Bales, and then it was Johnson's, and now it's K&S. We have the tire store, the wayside. So we're propagating all around Rosamond, and I'll be putting those little things out on Facebook, or I see John Joyce is here, so we'll probably get him to put some out there in the Rosamond News and stuff. So, and then when we have our 60th in here, there'll be a big display on this wall. But we're going to have lots of exhibits. The gold mine, we're going to have a gold thing, and we're going to have the raceway and Willow Springs out there for the stagecoach community, that whole thing. We were seeing if we got some folks that are coming from the Indian tribes that were back in those days too. So it'll all be published. It's all going to be here. We're going to have hopefully some cars out from the raceway out in the parking lot, maybe an old-time Ford. We're trying to work on that too. Good. So that's going to be out there. And all the fourth graders are coming through. There's going to be about 300 of them. That's going to be a field trip here too. So a field trip for the fourth graders from West Park and Rosamond. So we planned a big event, so we all want you guys to come out and enjoy it.
It'll be Thursday, May 9th.
May 9th.
May 9th. We're
It's
going to
going to be
have
all day long, so. And we'll install our officers at 5.
Yeah.
There'll be some celebration cake. And then you can look at all the exhibits.
Where's it gonna be?
Here, throughout the library.
Okay, Janet, you want to do your questioning?
And I wonder, where's Gracie? If you could help me, Gracie, would you mind when somebody, remember you have to raise your hand first, and Fran's going to be helping to judge that. And then if you get the right answer, you get a little candy. And I don't know how many candies are in the bag. If we run out of candies, we're done with the quiz, so. Give me the answer, Tom. No, you might have one. No, I do. Here, Gracie, you can just hold on to that, and then when someone has the right answer, if you would give them one of those. Don't want to take more than one. We got to spread it around, okay? Okay. You know, listening to this again, I've listened to it about 3 times in the last week or so. I'm just amazed at the knowledge he has and the things that he can remember, the dates and stuff, you know, and who was there and all of that. Anyway, it's just great that we have that video. All right. Question number 1. Glenn Settle was born in a railroad section house because his dad was what for the Southern Pacific Railroad? Did you see a hand?
Jane threw her hand up first.
I thought
She
he
put
was
it
going to ask
down.
when he was born.
Oh, okay. Did it look like there was a hand over here?
Section supervisor.
No, over here.
Oh,
Over here first.
all right. I'm gonna step back and let Fran totally do it. What was yours?
I was gonna say a section manager.
Foreman, yeah. So they both got it right. We'll give them each one, and then I'm gonna stay out of the calling on hands and totally let Fran do it. Because when I'm looking down reading, I'm not doing a good job of doing that. Okay, and the gentleman over here by the door. All right. And then number 2, although Glenn's birth certificate was signed by a doctor because he was born in Palmdale, who helped deliver many of the early babies and pioneer families in Palmdale? Stick your hands up high if you were up first.
I saw her hand in the back.
Okay.
And Judy.
And who?
She kept putting it down.
What's your answer?
That's Audrey.
Audrey, okay.
Mom.
Do you remember the name? No. We need the name. Okay, all right. Here. Mom Everett? Mom Everett, yeah. It was Mom Everett. She seems to have been quite famous as the midwife in that area. But he seemed quite tasty. He says, there's a doctor's signature on my birth certificate. So he just thought that was interesting, I think. Okay, number 3. When Glenn was, and by the way, they seem to have quite a few local baseball teams. That was a big thing in those days. When Glenn was a bat boy for the local baseball team in Palmdale, they played in Tehachapi, and he was thrilled to eat where? I think it was close, but gotta shoot your hands up. I think that's Brandy, right? You're saying Brandy? Yes.
Sorry, I was like,
Okay.
Harvey House.
The Harvey House in Mojave, yes, and we have pictures. It was a 2-story building. I just wish I could have seen it, but. And they took the top story off, I believe, before it was ever burned, didn't they? Didn't it go to 1? I'm not sure. Okay, question number 4. Who moved most of the buildings to the Tropico Gold Camp?
All 3 of these got them up simultaneously. Russ, Jane,
Okay, well.
Ella.
Ella, who do you think it was?
And Louis Arabica.
And Rusty, what would you say? Yeah, and you too. Okay.
He moved our house to our
Gracie, could you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
each one of them? That was just too easy, I guess. He said about 50, not quite 50, but. And if you grew up around here, that would, I'm not sure I even knew what Louis Arabica did, but I just knew the name. It was just a name. Come to find out, we have some property up in the Tehachapis, and for years there was an old railroad car up there. And people wondered how it got up there. When I was doing a little bit of online research, I found out Louis Arabica was the one who got that old railroad car up in the canyon, which was, you know, not real high up on the mountain, but it was pretty narrow and kind of a rough road and stuff. And he's the one that got it up there. It was real interesting about that. Thanks. We've got a few more candies left, huh? All right. Number 5, when telling about the superintendent's house, which came from the Munn Mining Company, and it was moved from Soledad Mountain, Glenn told about filming a MasterCard commercial, watch for the hands. What animal got away and was being chased around the west end? Pick someone who hasn't had a chance.
Kangaroo?
Laurie Cruz, okay.
Kangaroo?
Kangaroos, yes, and he made a joke about someone thinking those were strange-looking rabbits or big ones.
Just one thing about that railroad car was in the Tehachapi Mountains. The first time I went up there, when I was dating Janet, she goes, "Oh, look up here, and here's cross arms,
Yeah,
the
right,
crosswalk
beside the road.
for a railroad crossing, and here's this passenger car sitting in the trees in there. And we found out that when they moved it out, just before they had the fire in 2012, they moved it out and donated it to the Carson City Museum, Railroad Museum in Carson City. So the train car still exists.
Yeah, did you learn it?
That came from Southern Pacific down below Los Angeles.
Actually, it was up here and then moved down there for restoration.
Yeah.
It came from up here.
Yeah, from.
It was in someone's junkyard. I can't
In
scrap.
what was it?
Purdy.
Purdy's in Los Angeles,
One
the
of the old
Cascade
railroad
Mountains,
cars.
and now it's in Carson City where everybody can see it now.
Okay, then, watch for hands. When they went to move the mud mining camp's boarding house from Soledad Mountain, what was left behind?
This lady back here.
Okay. Yes?
The brick oven.
The brick oven, yes, it was evidently so heavy, and they lifted the building up, and that evidently just went right through the floor, and they didn't even try to get it. And when you look at that building and think how they would have moved it, and down the side of a mountain, and he said the roads weren't good, it's just amazing. Okay, the Settles, number 7, Settles got seats for their boarding house, which they were fixing up as a club place, from the theater at Randsburg, but these originally came from the theater in Lancaster, operated by who?
Okay, let's try this gentleman.
Okay.
Julie Garden's dad.
Yes, Julie Garland's dad, the Gum family. He had a theater so his girls could perform.
They live right there.
Yep. Number 8. The story goes that the little girl sitting on the porch of the boarding house before it was moved died from what? Oh, I think Gracie got that. A rattlesnake bite. That sounds so tragic. She just was dangling her legs over the side and got bit. Oh, yeah, Number 9, the building was moved to the gold camp in 1958. Who started meeting there in 1959? I think it was Rusty.
The Hysterical Society?
The witch? I know other people say that too, right. The Kern County Historical Society. It seemed like they had a goal of looking for a big building. And I'm not sure about the other historical societies, but somewhere in this, he said that he felt that Antelope Valley needed a historical society. So I'm thinking maybe it was one of the first. Could it be? I don't know for sure. But and it included a lot of people in the early days. Kern, Antelope Valley, that's a big area. Number 10, Glenn said that the Historical Society served a lot of refreshments from the bar, but not liquids. They got the bar from a hotel in...
Ella and the gentleman, they bought the same time.
Tehachapi?
In Tehachapi, right. And I don't know if any of you aren't familiar with what the gold camp was, but back in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, they started collecting out at Tropico Mine. They started collecting a lot of old buildings, and Glenn and Doreen and her brother, Cliff and his wife, they were just collecting all kinds of old furniture and just all kinds of artifacts and stuff, and then they could display them in these buildings. Rusty?
Did anybody ever see the old museum inside the mine building right up where you went in the tours into the, they had a great...
In the mine
They
itself?
had a great museum right there in one of those old buildings right up.
Yes, you did.
Oh, right up.
Yes, you did.
I'm gonna just ask, Don Dias, weren't you a tour guide at that time?
Really?
Would you like to share?
But there was some neat stuff in there,
Oh,
old photographs and stuff.
Yeah.
Of the big jackrabbit drives and all that
Wow.
stuff. There was some neat photos.
We found that plaster that said Kern County Historical
Like
Society
an
Museum.
emblem, a big...
We found it in that building when we were.
Oh, that's the building you're
That's
talking
the
about.
building.
That was also used as their supply store. And they've still got supplies in there.
Yeah.
We got out there a few years ago. Very, very interesting. What? Oh, Don, did you have a story? You were going to tell us something? Please.
I really don't.
All right. Be thinking about it because I've got a few more questions and then maybe you'll have something to share.
I can make up something.
Oh, probably a lot of these guys have done that. Well, anyway, let's see. Number 11. They had a potbelly stove in that boarding house that they started using for their meetings to keep warm, but no other amenities. When nature called, what did they do?
Oh,
Okay, back
I
here.
know what that is.
Uh-huh.
He said they had to go out behind the bush.
Can you imagine if we were all at a meeting and we had to start doing that per day? Oh, I can't imagine. And they met there for 20 years. I just can't believe that. Although he did say it was the old people, but still. Number 12, when they were giving tours of the gold camp, Glenn tells about a boy who found a chunk of coal. Why didn't he think it could burn and make heat?
Oh,
Over here, how about this?
Because it was a rock.
Yeah, you can't burn a rock. He didn't know what coal was. And then on top of that, he said, why don't you just throw the switch? Okay. Number 13, the Ritter Building came from their ranch in Leona Valley. It was used for storage, a church sometimes or whatever. At the gold camp, they used it as a store, and they sold tickets for what? I think it's Jane?
I've got one. So she can.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Sure.
The mine tours.
The mine tours, right, okay, there you go, mine tours. And number 14, the Stuckey, Kenton, Dudley building was built by Mr. Stuckey and was Rosamond's first post office, store, and what?
Hotel.
I think it was over here, she raised it.
It was.
Hotel?
Whoever
Okay.
said it, that was what I'm good. Give them the
Give her both one. I don't know who said it back here, but give her one and back there. I think we've still got, looks like we got some. Okay, good, we're good. May have more chocolate hearts than I have questions, I don't know. All right, number 15. What kind of records did they find when they moved it to the gold camp? Remember, stick them up high. It's kind of hard to see out of the peripheral vision. Who do you think was first, Frank?
Oh, all of them. All of them. Participating.
What if everybody just says it together and we'll go on to the next question? What'd they find there?
Post
Postal
office.
records, right,
Yeah.
from the post office, yeah. And I'm sure when you think about that, some of that stuff would be government documents, you would think, and yet here are these old records they found. Okay, number 16, remember, shoot your hand up high so it sticks out there. Ezra Hamilton sold his mining claim to people in what town? Near Glendale, California. I think she was first. No, was it Tehachapi? So then who was, okay, yes? Tropico, yes. There was a town down there called Tropico. I remember reading about it a long time ago. One of the Historical Society books. And this company that bought Ezra Hamilton's mine named it after their town. So that's how it got the name of Tropico. And now no one down there, or well, very few people would know about Tropico. Number 7, what?
Montrose.
Is that the area? Okay. Number 17, who was the last person to live in this building after he sold his Oak Creek Ranch?
I think it was.
James?
Is it Raleigh Dudley?
Raleigh Dudley, yes. Okay. And let me find, I left off. Okay, what did he build a big metal building for next to his old home? Stick those hands up.
Get him up there.
Who, Fran?
That was Ella over there.
Ella's got a good arm there, see? Okay, Ella.
He built a garage for his car.
What kind of car?
Cadillac.
Cadillac. Okay, it's Cadillac.
Did Reuben sell it to him?
He only started when he was in school. Okay. Number 19. What event brought the end of old glass turning purple? Right.
Yes, the war.
Which war? World War One. Good. World War I. Because they needed magnesium for the war effort and manganese. Sorry. And they no longer put that in the glass, so it doesn't turn purple, I guess. Number 20. Eli Munns moved the house from the Plant 42 area of Palmdale to what area for a home for his family? Where did he move his home?
That was Ella.
Ella again? Wow. Okay, let's see if she's got it right. Where did he move it?
He went to Leona Valley.
To Leona Valley, right. And he took it apart, board by board, marked them, and then put them back together. It's just amazing.
puzzle.
how people moved houses in those days instead of go build a new one or move into an old one or something, but many of them moved houses. And that wasn't just in this area, lots of places. Number 21, the Kern County Historical Society had, I guess it was a borrowed collection, loaned to them, but a collection of what? That went to the Old Timers Association.
Jane has,
Judy, I think.
Judy.
Pictures?
Pictures, photos, yes. And then it went back to the Old Timers Association when they closed down the mine tours and the Tropico Gold Camp. And then, sounds like Frank Lane gave them to West Antelope Valley Historical Society. And you know, there are so many things that were part of our Kern Antelope history that have, because they closed the mine and the place. And then he also talks about another building that was actually, he says the Antelope Historical Society was in there, but that was the museum. When he talks about 20 years, at first I was a little bit confused, but I think that other building was the, one was the meeting room, where the bar was and stuff, and the other was go to other places. And like the videotapes or the audio tapes, I would love to see if any of those are around. And you know, Norma Gerber had them.
Gerber is the one that supposedly got them at the museum, and I have a feeling a lot of that is now in the rural museum.
Oh, okay, okay. It'd be interesting to find out because some of those could be really interesting too. The Studebaker wagon that was from the Munns Ranch was used in the construction of what? Yes?
Aqueduct.
Aqueduct, right. A lot of things, we don't always think about that, but that was from the aqueduct. And then the Godey family donated an old piece of machinery for what? Okay, Brandy and Judy, what do you say? Yeah, and yeah, why don't you give them both one? Yeah. Almond sheller. And he wondered why it was such a big piece of machinery. But we had some fresh almonds just the other day. We got around to look from you. And Ray had this pile of almonds. And by the time we got done, we had just a tiny little pile. It takes a lot of work to do that. I know how long he worked on it. And so you can see why they would have a big machine that would have done it faster when we used to have so many almonds in the area. And then this is the last question. Be ready on the hands. Over and over, Glenn mentioned that these buildings could do what? They would have a story to tell. Yes. If they could talk. Yes, he seemed to really think about the history and all those things. Thank you very much, Tracy. And thank you, everybody, for your answers.
Thank you, Janet, for taking this. Siobhan, would you like to sort of tease people with the upcoming?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
First of all, we are so impressed that so many people came out. We really thought we would throw in the film because we figured it was Valentine's Day and nobody would show up. And what a surprise. And what truly Valentine's is love and a love of history. And we are just tickled pink. I would encourage, if you have not joined the Historical Society, we are a cheap date. Please join. The dues will go to pay for the insurance and the things for the building that we're hoping to have. So please join. And if you haven't joined this year already, we have a half price sale for the rest of the year. So we're really cheap now. You know, we're maybe Harvey House girl type of cheap.
Speak for yourself.
But next month, for the month of March, we're going to have Ann Yost speak. And she is going to be speaking on the Yost family history, which was the sheriff's station, the fire station, rich history. And then in April, we are having Joe Polly speak and talk about decades of history. What a treat that will be. And then in May, of course, will be our big 60th anniversary. You talk about if the walls could talk, we will have so much here. And we are dragging every 4th grade class through here. 4th grade history is the study of California and local history. And once again, your dues supports the insurance that brings all these little rugrats out. So please do that. In May, we will be meeting out at the Willow Springs town site in the bar.
Not at May.
It's June.
June, sorry, my other May, called June. So that will be in there, and then we are dark in July and August, and in September, we will meet out at our place out at the ranch, and we're teasing on that one, so I won't say anything yet. And last September was the 90th birthday of Rosamond Elementary School, and it kind of got lost in having a big birthday party for it. So in October, Ann Yost will be doing a history of Rosamond Elementary and of the school. And so we're really looking forward to those things. If you have someone that you go, oh my gosh, Siobhan, you have got to get this person, please come in and grab me. Our programs are only as good as we have this knowledge. I spent 2 hours with Don Dias down at the post office. We've lost our central gathering place. Poke in those stories and feel free to say, have this speaker come and speak. We love your stories. We want your history. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, Siobhan. You are an awesome person.
I have one other item. As part of our 60th anniversary, we have a famous muralist here. His name is Jed Strange. Jed, would you stand up? He's doing our 60th poster for us.
Yeah.
He's done all the block work and that huge mural out on the side.
Oh, that's Jeff.
Yeah.
Did Don come up with a story for us now?
Don, do you have a story?
Okay.
That was in high school.
Okay.
Okay, well, then I will say again, thank you all for coming. We really, really enjoy having this kind of a track. And thank you for your support. And we hope to see you all next month. Yes, oh, you have something to add?
I have a question, on Tropico, did they find the brass plate that was taken from the
No, no, we did not. But we have the Historical Society. Well, first of all, yeah, let me give you some background. There is at the mine a time tunnel that is supposed to open in the year 2000.
1,000 years from now.
Well, 1,000 years from 1966. What, 66?
50 years.
And there was a brass plaque on the door there that was stolen a couple of years ago. And has not ever appeared, and because, you know, it had salvage value. So we have a smaller aluminum plaque that duplicates exactly what was on the brass plaque, and it will be put up as soon as everybody can sort of touch bases. The people at Tropico are actively mining up in Middle Buttes. Clifford Burton is up here off and on because they're actively mining there. So
Dave Kiefer, right?
yeah, it's Dave and Dan Kiefer. But they are, you know, they know that we have the plaque. They know that we're trying to get it reinstated, this little aluminum, which we hope has no salvage value. And, you know, but it's the way it is, I guess.
Thank you, thanks for answering.
Okay.
Well, if people don't know where Middle Butte is, I'd never heard that until I saw this video. I've always heard it as the Cactus Queen.
Yeah, it's up there.
And it's right going up 90th Street, right where the curve is.
Yeah.
That's
North of Backus Road.
Middle Butte, yeah, just north of Backus Road.
But east of 90th Street.
Yeah.
All that mountainous area is called Middle Butte.
Relocating the mountain.
Okay, again.